Robert Durst. Mr. Durst is here, Mr. Chesnoff, and Mr. DeGuerin. We have all counsel for the people, Mr. Miata, Mr. Henderson, and Mr. Milius, Mr. Bellion, also Mr. Lewin. And Mr. Henderson, shall we resume the video presentation of the conditional examination of Mr. Chavin?
Did you tell the detective during that interview that Susan had told you that Kathy's not coming back, there's nothing that you guys can do for her, and we love Bob, and we need to stay as friends?
Yes, I did.
Did you tell Detective Becerra at that time that Susan had repeated this to you more than once?
I believe I did, yes.
I want to now go back a step, and I want to ask you, when Susan Berman was murdered, did that have any effect on you as to whether or not the statements that Susan Berman had made to you previously about Bob Durst's involvement in Kathy's death, as to whether they were now more believable to you?
I certainly thought about it a great deal, and I began to doubt my own feelings.
At some point in time, whether it was before Bob Durst called you from jail or after he called you from jail, you became aware that Bob Durst had been charged with murder in Galveston, Texas. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you become aware of any of the allegations relating to the killing and the disposal of the body?
Did I become aware of those?
Yes.
Yes, I did.
What specifically did you become aware of with respect to the disposal of the body?
That it was dismembered?
Did you end up hearing during the situation at Galveston, you end up hearing that Mr. Durst was accused of murdering and dismembering Morris Black?
Yes.
And did you later learn that Mr. Durst was conceding that he had dismembered the body?
Yes.
When you heard that Mr. Durst had dismembered the body, prior to that, if someone would have said to you, hey, Nick Chavin, on a scale of 0 to 100, with 0 being, oh, I'm absolutely, I have no idea, I'm sorry, whether Bob Durst would dismember a body at all, and 100 being, there's no possible way that Bob Durst that I know would dismember a body with an axe or saws, etc. What would your response have been?
100.
I don't understand it.
Mr. Chavin, can you please describe your level of shock when you learned that Robert Durst had dismembered Morris Black's body with his hands and tools?
Extreme shock. Disbelief.
If someone were to have told you that that had happened without an admission by Mr. Durst that he had done it, would you ever have believed that the Robert Durst you knew could have done such a thing?
Of course not.
Did the situation with Susan Berman being murdered, and then shortly thereafter Morris Black being killed, and then admittedly dismembered by Mr. Durst, did that affect your view of what Susan had originally told you about Bob's involvement in Kathy's death?
Very much so. Very much so.
And can you explain why, please?
Yes. One of the primary foundations of my belief that Bob was not responsible for Kathy's disappearance or what happened to Susan, was that I couldn't believe that he was capable of hands-on violence against someone at that extreme. But here, after admitting that he was, it's like taking the gloves off. All things are possible now.
Mr. Chavin, you mentioned that Detective Becerra came and spoke to you.
Yes.
And you told him that information. How many years before that, approximately, was that before you met me?
Wow. From the time I met Detective Becerra to approximately a year ago, I guess.
So, is it fair to say that whatever you told Detective Becerra or other investigators back in 2001, myself,
16 years, actually.
the detectives from LAP Robbery Homicide Division, or Mr. Bailey, we could not have had any part in that, is that correct?
That's correct.
In November of 2001, November 29, 2001, this is now after Morris Black's death. Do you recall speaking to investigators again?
Only vaguely. I really don't recall the situation. I thought that my wife had, not me.
I'm going to ask you, do you remember relating to investigators that Bob Durst was the smartest person you ever met?
Yes, I thought that's what I said to Detective Becerra.
Do you recall relating that he was very clever but absolutely anti-authority?
Yes.
Do you recall relating that he's very manipulative and vindictive?
Yes.
Do you recall stating that Bob and Susan were very close?
Yes.
Do you recall stating that Bob trusted Susan like no one else?
Yes.
Do you recall stating that in 3 separate conversations, Susan told you that Bob had told her that he had killed Kathy?
Yes.
Do you recall saying that Susan said Bob told her that he had said that, but that he didn't mean to do it?
Susan interjected that he didn't mean to do it, that he had said it, yes.
Do you recall Susan telling you, and you repeating to the detectives, that Bob said he couldn't help himself?
No.
Do you recall saying to the detectives that Susan said, there's nothing that anyone can do for Kathy now, and we love Bobby, so we have to help him now?
Yes. Thought I said that.
Do you recall saying that Bob himself had told her what happened to Kathy?
Will you repeat that?
Do you recall saying that Bob had told her himself what happened to Kathy? Do you recall that Susan said that Bob told her that that's how she knew, that Kathy had told her?
Yes.
Did you tell detectives that Susan had told you that Bob himself had told her what happened to Kathy?
Yes.
Did you tell detectives that you yourself did not believe it, and that it was easier to believe that Kathy was killed by a drug dealer?
Yes.
And I want to ask you, why was it easier for you to believe that Kathy had been killed by a drug dealer?
I believe that there was a photograph that Bob told me about of Kathy with a tall Latin American man. And it just seemed like it was more probable. I think she had a bit of a drug problem.
Let me ask you, Mr. Chavin, did you want to believe that your best friend had killed his wife?
No.
Were you looking for any other thing to grab a hold of?
Yes.
Did you tell detectives that Susan told you that Bob had confided in her to, quote, more easily set up an alibi, unquote?
Yes, except for the word alibi.
Do you remember what word you used?
A statement or a condition or a reason. I mean, the intent was the same as alibi, but I just pulled it, so.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Right, you reported to return at 1:30 p.m. We'll be in recess until 1:30 p.m. President, witness, Mr. Chavin is presumed the witness, and then you remain on the road. You may conclude your direct example.
Mr. Chavin, before lunch, I was rushing to try to get some questions answered. I'm not sure if the last question that I was clear about. When you gave your explanation, the last question I asked you, where if Susan had said to you, 1 second, I'm sorry. I asked you a question about whether you had provided information to the detectives around November 29, 2001, that Susan had confided in you. I'm sorry, that you had told detectives that Mr. Durst had confided in Susan, and I asked you to, quote, more easily set up an alibi. My question for you, the way that I asked it, I don't know if I made clear, were you conveying something Susan had told you? You understand what I'm saying?
No, please say.
So, the question I asked, I don't think I added the preface of, did you tell detectives that Susan had told you? I think all that I said was, did you tell detectives, and not making it clear whether or not that information came from Susan. So if I say it again, the statements that I've been asking you about, where I've said, did you tell the detectives Susan told you so-and-so? Do you recall those questions?
Yes. I mean, there were a bunch of them, right?
Yeah. No, so all I'm simply asking you is, just want to make clear that when you testified, the last question right before lunch, the question about confiding in the alibi, I just want to ask you, was that information you were speculating about, or is that something Susan told you?
That's something she told me.
Okay. I just wanted to clear up. I wasn't sure if the record was clear on that. You mentioned, I'm going to go fast forward now to the point where Bob Durst called you from the Galveston jail. Do you recall discussing that
Yes.
previously? That's the first time you indicated you had spoken to him, by your memory, in a number of years. Is that right?
Correct.
And what, if anything, when he called you, what did he say or ask you to do?
He asked me to take the call from a psychiatrist that had been, I guess, I don't know what the word is, that he'd been examined by. And he was coaching me as to what he would like me to talk about and discuss.
And what did he specifically say to you?
We were both aware of the fact that the call was being listened to by the authorities. So his language was, and because we knew each other well, that he could do this, he said, remember how I had that Asperger's difficulty when I was younger? And I said, yes. No, to the best of my knowledge, I knew of no such thing, but I was saying yes because we were being listened to.
So he just stopped you. So you believed on this phone call, when Mr. was calling from jail, you believed when you took the call that it was being monitored.
Yes.
And so when Mr. Durst...
He had told me it was. He then went through a series of psychological disorders, emphasizing that I already knew about these and would I explain them in more detail to the psychiatrist. Now, all of these were news to me, and I was more than willing to do that.
Let me stop you. Had you ever known Mr. Durst previously to mention to you that he had Asperger's?
No.
Do you yourself have a special needs child?
Yes, I do.
And are you familiar personally with Asperger's?
As well, I mean, it's not fully understood, but yes, it runs along a line of autism. There's pervasive developmental delay, there's Asperger's, there's a few other things, and then there's autism on the extreme end of it. It's part of a long line of disability.
And you have this experience not because you've been trained, but because you have a child.
Yes.
Had Mr. Durst, in the years that you've known him, had you ever noticed any symptoms of Asperger's?
No.
Had you ever noticed any symptoms based on your experience that your friend Bob Durst had displayed in the years you've known him, consistent with Asperger's?
No.
There are some people, would you agree, Mr. Chavin, who have an inability to kind of relate to people?
Yes.
There are other people who, although they have an ability to relate to people, choose to, and there's no other use of the term that I can do any better, kind of choose to be an asshole, not because they don't understand, but because they choose to be that way. Have you ever known people of both types that I've just indicated?
Yes, I have.
In your experience, Mr. Chavin, you've known individuals who are on the spectrum who have an inability and a difficulty to interrelate to people, is that correct?
That's correct.
Have you known other people who are, for lack of better terms, intentional jerks?
Yes.
If I were to ask you, based on your experience with Bob Durst, was there one of those two definitions that would fit how Mr. Durst tended to interrelate and act with other people?
Yes.
Which term?
Well, I think the key word in what you said is intentional. Sure, jerk is a little bit judgmental, but that's what I would say intentionally antisocial or someone not communicative. If I may do that, I'm sorry.
And did you have experience with Mr. Durst when he would be in social situations where it was inappropriate for him to act that way and he would have the ability to control it?
Yes.
You gave a previous example when you were interviewed before about burping. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Can you please discuss what Mr. Durst would do in terms of his burping and what you observed in terms of his control over it?
He would periodically burp very loudly, and in such a way that you knew it wasn't an accidental extrusion, sort of intentional.
And do you recall mentioning on your own about a banker, for instance?
No, I don't.
Let me ask you, were you in situations with Mr. Durst where it was not to his choice or advantage to burp, and he was able to control it and he didn't burp?
Yes.
While Mr. Durst was in jail in Galveston, did you visit him at all?
No.
Did you attend any of the trial?
No.
Did you keep up on what was going on with that proceeding?
Yes, I did.
When you knew Bob Durst back in New York City, did he have any experience with firearms?
No.
And did you yourself, you grew up in Texas part of the time, right?
Right.
And in Texas, in the nursery, you're given a shotgun or a .22.
Something like that, yes.
What was that?
Daisy Red Ryder.
Daisy Red Ryder.
I had one of those too, yeah.
Is that before or after you're out of the delivery room?
It's usually by age 1 or 2.
Yeah, it's along with a baby rattle.
And did you have experience in Texas with firearms?
Extensive, yes.
When did you first become aware that Mr. Durst had an interest and experience with firearms?
When did I first become aware that he had an interest?
Experience that he had firearms.
Honestly, not until that's the way that Susan died. We'd never discussed it before. I assumed that it was as foreign to him as it was to any New York kid.
And let me ask you, when you heard the circumstances of the Galveston case, the killing there, did you become aware that Mr. Durst conceded that he owned a firearm?
Well, I'm sorry, that's actually the first time that I was, yeah, I was shocked to learn that. And I didn't understand where he got experience until later reading an article. But,
So what I'm asking from you is, so in essence, you had no personal experience with Mr. Durst and firearms?
none, we never discussed it.
And then later, you read something about him being involved in firearms, and that was a surprise to you?
Very much so.
When I say the names, Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling, do you recognize those names?
Oh, yes.
And how do you recognize them?
They're the two people that created All Good Things, the movie, and the Jinx for HBO.
How did you first hear about them?
They contacted me.
And did they contact you for what reason, did they tell you?
Yes, they wanted me to appear. They wanted me to be recorded as part of the HBO series, The Jinx.
Had you ever heard of the movie All Good Things?
Yes, I watched it.
Did you ever watch The Jinx?
Yes,
Did you watch All Good Things before or after you watched The Jinx?
before.
And do you recall how it was that you ended up seeing All Good Things?
Yes. I was invited to a preview presentation of it.
And when you went to the preview, who invited you? What was the situation there?
The director of external communications, Jordan Berkowitz, for the Durst organization, called me and invited me to attend it with him.
And did you end up going to this screening?
Yes, I did.
And were you told why you were invited?
Yes.
And what were you told?
I was told that I was invited so that I could sit down in a very small conference with Jordan Berkowitz and a lawyer and Douglas Durst and discuss what, if anything, should be the Durst organization reaction to that film.
Were they asking you whether or not the film was factual, or were they asking you critically what you thought of it?
Well, both. More, what, if anything, should the Durst organization do in response to it? They were concerned, and dismayed at it, as was I.
And was one of the reasons that you were concerned and dismayed because of the portrayal of Seymour Durst?
Absolutely.
Were you contacted subsequently by either Andrew Jarecki or Mark Smerling or someone who represented as working for them to participate in an interview for the Jinx?
Yes, that's an understatement.
Okay, and when you say it's an understatement, tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I was barraged with pleas, requests, emails, phone calls. I did have a short cup of coffee at a coffee shop with Andrew Jarecki, and they pleaded and begged and cajoled and whined and did everything possible to get me to appear.
And did you agree to do it?
No.
Now, at this point in time, if you can remember, were you talking to Bob Durst again?
Actually, yes, and to a great deal, because he was very, very concerned with my reticence to appear on the Jinx. I counseled him, please don't do it, it's a terrible idea. And he said, yes, that's what his lawyers told him. I said, don't do it, are you going to have creative control? He said, no. Are you going to have a right of refusal? He said, no. I said, you don't know what's going to happen. This is a terrible, terrible thing, don't do it. I hate these guys. They character assassinated Seymour Durst. He disagreed with me about those things. He liked the movie, which stunned me.
I'm gonna back you up a step here. Did Bob Durst specifically tell you that he had discussed with his lawyers whether he should do the interview with Jarecki and Smirnoff?
Well, yeah, to the extent that I just said to you, he said his lawyers told him the same thing, not to do it.
And did he tell you that in the end, it was his decision and he wanted to do it?
Yes, he did. He said in emails to me that he didn't think they meant him any harm, and he didn't see any. He got very, very, very upset with me for not doing it.
Yeah, I'm going to get that in a second.
Oh,
Did you
sorry.
ever have
I'm
a
sorry.
conversation with him about all good things?
Yes,
And would you agree, Mr. Chavin, that All Good Things is a fictionalized version of a character that was marketed as being based on Robert Durst?
yes,
And did Mr. Durst tell you that he was aware that the main character in that movie was supposed to be him?
yes,
And was that understood by everybody that you knew, that you spoke to within the kind of Durst world, that this was the story of Bob Durst?
yes. I think that's obvious.
And were there characters in that movie? Was there a character that represented Kathy?
Yes.
Was there a character that represented Susan?
You know, I only saw it once, and there was, but I don't have a lot of clear. I mean, I don't have any real memory of that. I wasn't focused on that.
Was there a character that represented Seymour?
Yes,
And is it fair that in that movie, that the depiction was that the Bob Durst character either himself committed or was responsible for the murders of 3 people?
yes.
Kathy Durst,
Well, the disappearance, yes,
Susan Berman,
yes,
and the Morris Black character.
yes.
And
But we're talking about the movie or the Jinx?
now I'm talking about the movie, All Good Things.
I'm a little fuzzy on remembering Morris Black specifically in that. I only saw it once.
When you saw the movie, was it clear to you that this was not a depiction of Robert Durst that was complimentary?
Very much so. You're asking whether I thought it was derogatory as a depiction of Bob.
Yes.
I thought it was. He didn't, but I did.
And was the reason that you thought it was derogatory was that in essence,
It was very derogatory, and it just didn't seem to bother Bob. Even the dog part, though I know Bob so loved dogs. Friend,
did you ever say anything to Bob saying, how could you cooperate with these guys when they made this movie about you?
yes, we argued about that. Not violently or anything, but he said he didn't see anything wrong with it. He liked the movie. Jake was stunned.
And you said that he called you, correct, pursued you to do an interview with Jarecki and Smurley as well, is that correct?
Again, that's an understatement.
Okay.
Yes.
What did Bob Durst do to try to get you to participate in an interview with Jarecki and Smurley?
He knew I had a long commute, and he offered me the key to his apartment to stay in on occasion if I needed to.
And was that something he'd ever done before?
No,
Let me
that's
ask you-
if it needed to be.
In terms of Bob Durst, and if I were to ask you, how private of a person is Bob Durst?
He's very private. I was amazed.
In your experience, have you ever known that you're aware of Mr. Durst, personally you know, to have given someone the key to his apartment?
No.
And given who Bob Durst is in your relationship with him, how surprised were you when he offered it to you?
I was pretty surprised. People in New York don't normally do that.
And Did he ask you only one time to do the interview with Jarecki and Smerling?
No, several times. In emails he pleaded. So did Jarecki.
And did you end up doing the interview?
No. I thought it would be harmful to him that one.
At a certain point in time, sometime in late 2014, did you have a dinner with Robert Durst?
Yes.
And if I were to ask you right now, do you have a better memory of the date of the dinner or what was said at the dinner?
What was said?
Do you have a better memory of what credit card or cash was used to pay for the dinner, or a better memory of what was said at or after the dinner?
Clearly what was said.
Leading up to this dinner, did you and Mr. Durst have at least one discussion about what the purpose was going to be for this dinner?
Yes.
Can you describe that discussion, please?
Bob said, first he changed the place of where we would eat, and then he said he wanted to have dinner with me. He wanted to talk to me about Kathy and Susan.
And when he told you that he wanted to talk to you about Kathy and Susan, did he explain to you what that was about?
No.
Based on your relations with them and what you knew, what did you believe at that time his comment meant?
I believed that the only thing it could be about would be the unanswered questions about whether he was responsible for the disappearance and the death of Susan Berman.
By the time that you have had this dinner, this is obviously years after Kathy disappeared, is that correct?
Yes.
It's years after Susan's been murdered.
Yes.
It's years after Mr. Durst has killed Morris Black.
Yes.
It's years after you discovered Mr. Durst had dismembered Morris Black, correct?
Yes.
By this point in time, were you starting to suspect that Mr. Durst was involved with not only his wife's disappearance, which you testified to previously, but for Susan's death as well?
Yes.
When you went to dinner that night, did the subject of Kathy and Susan come up at the dinner itself?
At the dinner itself, we're saying no.
And were you waiting for that subject to come up?
Yes. Well, at least once I was, and then I forgot.
I want you to describe what happened at the end of that dinner.
The dinner concluded, and it was then that as we got up to leave, I realized that we hadn't discussed the two things that he had mentioned, Kathy and Susan. I felt kind of weird that I didn't bring it up. We walked out the door. This is hard. We walked out the door, and on the sidewalk, I said, "You wanted to talk about Susan." And Bob said, "I had to. It was her or me. I had no choice." And then he turned to walk away, and I said, "You wanted to talk about Kathy?" And he just kept walking away. Nothing more was said.
What was your response when he said this?
Flat, well, I think it's fair to say that I wasn't surprised. I was not shocked, but my response was one of, now I know. And I was aware of the fact that we didn't discuss Kathy's disappearance.
Have you, since that, in a moment,
May take a moment.
Sorry.
No, that's all right, take a moment.
It's just not easy.
you just said, you want to answer your question, but you just mumbled, this is not easy, is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell me, how do you feel about being here today?
Give me a second. I feel like it's something I have to do, had to do.
As you sit here, do you still feel a bond and a warmth towards Bob Durst?
It sounds ridiculous, but yes. I mean, this was the best friend who admitted killing my other best friend.
Mr. Chavin, can you describe in your own words how it makes you feel to be up there testifying against somebody that you consider to be your best friend?
I can try. I feel like there's two scales. One is a betrayal of Bob Durst, and the other is a betrayal of Susan Berman. And I feel two senses. I feel that the betrayal I had felt of Susan Berman was lightened considerably, and I have the weight of feeling grief and sadness about Bob. Not betrayal, but grief and sadness.
As you sit here today, do you have any personal feelings of animosity or hatred towards Mr. Durst?
No. I have a feeling of grief, sympathy, and sadness over Susan Berman.
The place that you're at today, and I don't mean physically, I mean, for lack of a better term, the position you come to with how you are accepting the position that you're in. Is that something that has taken you a considerable amount of time to get to?
Oh, yes. Very much so.
When you originally spoke to me, do you recall, did you pick up the phone to call me originally to tell me what you knew, or did I have to chase you down?
You had to chase me down, to say the least.
And if I were to tell you that the first time we spoke was on April 6th, 2015, does that sound about right?
Yes, it does.
And do you remember, prior to us actually talking on the phone, were you aware that I was trying to get a hold of you?
Yes, I was.
Did you answer my messages?
Not at all.
Was that intentional or an accident?
Oh, it was intentional.
Eventually on April 6th, 2015, something made you pick up the phone, is that correct?
Yes.
What was that?
It was a yellow sticky handed to me by the president of my company, my boss, saying, "You gotta call this guy, prosecutor, you have to call him." It's
Did I say 16 or 15?
15.
Yeah, I said 15.
Hmm.
And when your boss handed the yellow sticky, was he making any suggestion that you call me, or was he telling you you're gonna call me?
He was telling me.
And we have spoken on the phone numerous times since that day, is that correct?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
And have we always had, when we've spoken, have we always had an investigator, detective on the phone with us?
Yes.
And at times, have you called me, and have I told you, hold on a minute, Nick,
Yes.
I gotta get a detective on the phone.
Always.
I wanna go back to that first call on April 6, 2015. As you sit here today, do you remember that entire interview?
I remember a lot of it.
During that interview, were you completely honest and forthright with everything you knew?
No,
Why was that?
because I didn't want to tell you, the prosecutor, everything I knew.
Now, at this point, I would like to mark as people's next in order, the transcript. With the court's permission, do you want to mark the recording can be whatever's next, 5A, 5B, or do you want to go 5 and 6?
Okay, we do the recording 5 and the transcript 5A.
Yeah.
And Your Honor, if this is the April the 6th, 2015 transcript, we have the same transcript that we've designated on our witness list, on our evidence list. This should be the previous.
Let me make sure that we're in sync. Got it?
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, I think I've already given a copy of the transcript to the court reporter. I've already spoken to counsel. We can't agree on certain things. We've all agreed that we're not going to put your court reporter through the fun job of transcribing what's already in writing. I'm going to give one to the witness as well, with the court's permission.
Any objection? Any objection? You may approach and
For the record, Your Honor, this is an interview conducted April 6, 2015.
And may I inquire of the witness and partner whether he's seen this transcript before?
you may, or you may yield to Mr. Lewin.
I'm sorry, okay.
What's will you ask him if he's seen this before? For our here. One question for you.
Have you seen this transcript before?
No. Not,
Excuse me? Thank you.
no.
Well, this is it 56 minutes?
55 minutes or 25 seconds.
Your Honor, here's the best thing about it. Despite Mr. DeGuerin and my mutual joint history of underestimating how much time we're going to take, this will take less than 56 minutes. It cannot get any longer.
Is that a good volume? Sorry, were you asking us a question?
Hello. Hi, is this Nick Chavin?
Is this Cameron?
It is, yes.
Okay, is this about a jaywalking ticket, 10 years ago I got in Los Angeles? I'm kidding, John.
That's good. Hey, listen, I'm glad. I'll tell you what. Unfortunately, that fine's up to $111,000.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, it goes right to me though. I'll give you an address, and I can today $60,000. You're good to go. So do you mind if I call you Nick?
Well, I know, that's before you did. Yeah.
So Nick, you have some idea, I'm sure, why I'm calling you.
Yeah, but I never got any other calls from you. You said you were returning.
Yeah, I have. I've been leaving messages on all three of the numbers that I've got.
I just got one on my cell phone that I really play those, but on my direct line, I never got a message from you. Today's the first time I've heard from you.
Oh, well, the numbers I've been calling, I have 212-727-4701.
That's my number. That's my direct number.
Okay, I have 646-489-6381. Then I have
That's my cell number.
212-929-2200.
No, that's the switchboard here.
What number should, what?
747-4701.
Yeah, no, the office number, if it shouldn't be 22, what should it be?
The office number, 929-2200, isn't it?
Yeah, no, so it was right. Okay, well, so listen, here's why I'm calling, basically, and I understand, you're aware of the situation with,
You left messages that if I didn't want to talk to you, I could just tell you that, right?
yeah, here's
I'm not saying that, I just want to hear what you have to say.
yeah, so here's the situation. I cannot force you to speak with me. Whether you talk to me is up to you. Now, what I can do, is depending, I have the power of subpoena and grand jury, etc. But, basically, we want to,
What you can do is what?
so I can't force you to talk to me. We can subpoena you for court or for a grand jury. And, to me, I'd rather talk to you and find out, what you know. And, I really, it's not my desire, to use, all the tools in the toolbox. If I can talk to you, that's kind of a better start. So, are you willing to speak to me?
Yes.
I promise I won't bite. Okay, so listen, I understand, it's a tough situation, Nick, in that I know that you and Bob are longtime friends, and probably I'm guessing that this whole situation has probably been pretty upsetting to you, right?
Yeah.
And obviously from where I sit, a big concern that I've got is trying to figure out, what information you may or may not have that might be, helpful to my case, or either way, helpful, harmful, whatever info you have. So I guess kind of starting from the basics, going back, tell me, how'd you and Bob meet? What's your history?
So, you know what, this is going to be a long conversation, and can we put this to tomorrow?
Well, yeah, let me do this. We're going to be in...
It's like a 25-year thing.
Yeah, we're going to be in New York next week. I'd like to sit down with you in person. Tell me, what is it? We get it? Are you in Manhattan?
Yeah. I'm at work, so maybe we should talk now. How long did it take?
Well, my guess is I think it would likely take under an hour. It depends on kind of what information you have. But we're going to be there next week.
I'm trying to decide if I do or don't want to. I still have that prerogative, right?
Yeah, no, you do. But here's what I'll tell you, Nick. And if it's helpful, if we can, I'd like to speak with you. Can you give me 20 minutes now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's go with that. So basically, how did you guys meet?
Well, we met through a mutual friend, the late Susan Berman.
Okay. And when would that have been? 1989. Well, let's go this way. Did you meet Bob before or after Kathy disappeared?
Before.
Okay. So Kathy disappeared in 1982. So you knew Bob before.
I'm way off on that. I'm just off by 10 years. Sorry.
That's off to 70.
I came to New York in 1978, so it was 1979.
Okay.
I said 89. I'm sorry.
Hey, listen, close enough. And how did you and Bob? My understanding is you were in some kind of band, and you also knew Bob from work. How did you guys know each other?
How old are you?
How old am I? I'm 50.
Maybe you heard of country porn. I would sit on the Dallas Cowboys Saturday. I used to be a
Yeah, no.
49ers Saturday.
Oh,
You're in LA, you're
no, I'm in LA. I'm actually a Seahawk fan. So it's been
yeah, that's pretty good. I like the Seahawks.
it's been a tough month for me. By the way, my partner Habib Balian, who's another prosecutor, is also on the line with us. So he's the other one here. So okay, so you were in a band, is that right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I was in a band, and that's how I met Susan Berman.
so you met Susan before you met Bob.
Yes, I met her in San Francisco, actually.
Oh, okay.
Both lived in San Francisco, and we both moved to New York.
Okay. And you and Susan were you good friends in San Francisco?
Yeah. Not as good as we became in New York.
Okay. And then who came to New York first? You remember, was it you or Susan?
Susan.
Okay, and then when you came to New York, that's when you ended up meeting Bob?
Yes.
And you know, my understanding is you guys, did you work together, or were you more hanging out socially? What was kind of the relationship?
Well, first I was in a band, and then I had to get what we musicians call a day job. So I began working at Great Scott Advertising.
Okay.
She had a client that she called the nut job. His name was Trump, and he was doing something in 57. At the same time, Bob called me and said that he had how do you make you into the invitation? So I have an office building, and Memphis, I had any representative the advertising for it. And I said, sure, you know, I have no idea how to do it or anything. And then I didn't really deal with him. My dad was Seymour Durst from that point on. My dad was Seymour and David. At that point, Bob really wasn't in charge of the, he didn't do anything for a living. He was an office building. And he and Doug was sort of really empowered at that level.
So it's just Seymour.
Seymour and David, yeah, his brother.
Right. So you and Bob became kind of social friends, right?
What?
You and Bob became kind of more social friends, right?
Yeah, not working on work for Seymour and David.
How good friends are you?
With who? Bob. That's a funny thing I have to answer. I don't know. It's a long and complex web. At one time we were best friends. But then when his position was taken away from him, given to Douglas, Bob disappeared for about 10, 12 years out of my life and everyone else's life. So there's a long period where we never contact each other, even answer my calls or phone. And I was very embarrassed about what happened.
Nick, let me ask you, did you know Bob when Kathy disappeared?
Yes.
Was that in the 10 to 12 year window where he kind of withdrawn from you, or no?
No. It was before.
So let me start with Kathy. Did you
Why
know?
is this important? Why is this important?
Why is it important?
Yeah.
Well, you mean Kathy or Susan? All of it.
Your questions, yeah, because they're way in the past.
Well, I mean, Bob has been charged with murder. We're the prosecutors on the case.
Right.
You know, it's the murder that he's charged with. He is charged with murdering Susan, and that the motive for the murder was a witness killing, that Susan had information about Kathy. You have, in the past, you have told people that Susan told you on 3 separate occasions that that Bob had killed Kathy.
Who told you that? I can't say.
Well, that's in a report from Westchester County and the New York State Police back.
So that's when the police interrogated me and asked you questions.
Yeah, but this is a report that I have from 2001. Are you saying that's not accurate?
You know, the only people I ever spoke to, authorities, were the Westchester Police Department. We met at a coffee shop with my choice.
What?
And perhaps I told them that, yes.
Yeah, and so you told them that Susan had told you, right, on 3 separate occasions that
Bob had killed Kathy.
I also said that that was mitigated a bit by the fact that Susan exaggerated and was somewhat of a liar.
Well, let me just go through there.
You have that in there.
So here's what I've got. So it says that she had told you that he had said that he didn't mean to do it. Is that your memory?
No, that's not the memory.
Okay, so tell me, so what is your memory about what Susan said about Bob having killed Kathy? Hey, Nick, can you tell me, is it because of your loyalty to Bob?
I just understand what you be honest about it. We're just trying to figure out.
I mean, is it?
Is it because you guys are still friends, or?
I love Susan because she's a dear friend, and that's same with Pop, so this thing with your best friend killing your other best friend.
No, and listen, I mean, Nick, this is what I would say to you, is that, you know, we all have, it's easy for me to say, hey, if my best friend, you know, did something bad, I would immediately come forward. You know, you're not calling us, Nick. No one is, you're not snitching anybody out. You didn't pick up the phone and say, here's what we knew, here's what I know. But you know what? It's important. You were friends with Susan too, and
It's so much deeper than that, guys. It was so much deeper.
well, so tell us. We want to understand.
I was the best man at my wedding.
Okay.
You guys are close.
Yeah. What?
I've got photographs of my wedding. We have Bob and Susan's camping with me.
Is it hard for you to think that someone like that important in your life, you might?
Let's do a wedding picture. Let's do a wedding picture. Say someone your dear friend murdered. The person accused of doing it, and we're all standing together.
Yeah, I would certainly want to talk to the police. Probably is that what's going through your mind, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Nick, so here's where I'm coming from on this. So you've acknowledged, and you said before that Susan told you that Bob had said to her that he had killed Kathy, and you're not denying that now, correct?
No. Say that again. Repeat that.
So you told detectives back in 2001, you said that in 3 separate conversations, Susan told you that Bob had told her that he had killed Kathy.
Right.
Okay, and you also said at the time that Susan said that Bob told him that he didn't mean to do it. But then when I just brought that up right now, you said, no, that's not accurate.
Well, it's not accurate, but it's what she actually said was, she would argue with someone. First off, the police department, the guy said to me, he said, I'm the only one in North America that doesn't think that Bob killed Kathy. Those are the exact words to me.
That you were the only one, or that he was the only one?
I am.
Well,
I mean, in the New York Times reported that say Bob didn't kill Kathy, he loved her. The Times article, you'll see that. So that's how I felt back then. So it used to happen when you really so get into your hands and you push the whole set, okay? So what would happen is, I would say to Susan, Bob, we have the argument about it. I said, Bob didn't kill Kathy. And she said, this high pitched voice, hey, yes he did. I know he did. He told me. I mean, we still love him, but he did it. That was not that. That's the other thing you said, that he didn't mean to. She may have, you know what? She may have said that. That was close to the event back in 2001.
So forget about what you know or believe. Based on what she told you, did it appear that she believed, based on what he told her, that he killed her?
I think what Susan exaggerates, I mean, she's like a real fantasy writer that gets where she gets.
Well, yeah, maybe she was, maybe she wasn't, but from what she told you, she believed based on what Bob told her that he killed her, right?
Yeah, on many occasions. We're arguing about that.
And you said that you also told the cops at the time that Susan said, hey, there's nothing anyone can do for Kathy now, and we love Bobby, so we have to help.
Yeah, that was it. That was what I just said to you.
Yeah. And you said that you did not want to believe it. And you made a really interesting comment, Nick. You said it was easier to believe that Kathy was killed by a drug dealer. Do you remember saying that?
Well, not exactly. There was a reason behind that.
Okay.
I had a picture of like a Latin American dude and Kathleen found her kicked her behind the case.
Do you remember also saying, you said that...
And I'm looking at you, no, I don't remember saying that, but it's true.
What's that? I'm sorry, I missed that.
It's probably true what I said about it being easier to believe that someone that a drug dealer did it.
Because you don't want to believe one of your best friends kills one of your other close friends.
Right.
I mean, in your mind, is there some possibility that he didn't do this and just hasn't told you?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. What has he said? I'm sure you've known a long time. Like, what has he said or kind of done or hinted around that kind of maybe gives you that clue?
There's a whole lot of things that happened to me that I think he told me to it. Someone had sent, this is coming from it, someone had sent him a package with a pair of pants in it. They said, Captain really liked this kind of pants, so it came from San Francisco. So we went to San Francisco, looking for the place where it came from, or the person. And my life point is that I knew that really well. She didn't seem like he did it. I know that she's not a person you ever loved, okay? I know that.
Nick, let me... You
Doesn't
also,
mean a prayer of passion didn't happen, but you know.
Nick, you also mentioned that Susan said to you that Bob had confided in her to more easily set up an alibi. Do you remember telling the police that?
No.
Do you...
Again,
Yes.
We're not saying whether this is necessarily true or not. We're trying to figure out what Susan told you. That somehow she helped Bob with an alibi and
Oh, yeah.
what did she say about that?
Tell us what you meant by that.
And again, it's not that you're saying you believe this to be true. Just what did Susan tell you about it?
It's hard to remember, you know, I say it, with my mind, if I sit down and think about it, I can put myself back and remember it. I don't know if you there was something that she said like that. What did they say?
Say again?
They say I said about it.
What did the police say that you said?
Yeah, the police said that you said that Susan told you that Bob had confided in her to, quote, more easily set up an alibi.
She was actually a lot, but yeah, she did say that.
Let me ask you, did
She
she...
didn't say what it was she did. She didn't say what it was she
But
did.
did she say she basically had done, words to the effect of she did something to help him with his alibi? That's what she was saying? I'm sorry, you're breaking up.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you remember her saying something to the effect of, hey, I helped him out with his alibi? Something to that effect?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Nick, do you remember Susan ever mentioning making any kind of phone call for Bob, pretending to be Kathy, anything like that?
Well, here it gets mixed up with what I read in the papers. And I have to, listen, whenever I stand out, I may remember clearer and talk to you a week from now, a day from now, and say, you know, that's not exactly right. See, because the papers was somewhere along the line, someone said that the voice that called in that she was sick at medical school, when Susan saying she was Kathy. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, is that something that you remember Susan mentioning to you?
Wow. I can't say that I still remember it now. I can think about it. Because I know that I knew that was being said. So I don't know where I would have heard that. But then the papers.
Well, you know, I got to be careful how I answer that, Nick. Let me ask you this. The Susan that you knew, let's say that Bob had come to her and said, listen, Susan, I killed Kathy, I need your help. Would Susan have helped him?
Without question.
So if I were to say on a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being there's no way she would help him, and 100 being, oh, I'm absolutely certain, what would you say?
That's 100, I'm absolutely certain.
Yep.
Yes. That Kathy was right down on every level of his life, but in time.
96.
Okay.
Hey, officers, to be brutally truthful here, I think I would too.
Well, you know what, Nick, and that is listen, a lot of people, it's funny, in the work that we do, you'll have a case, where that happens in gang cases. You'll have somebody's mom will come in, and they'll say, my son was at home that night during murder. And the mom is lying. And for me, and for Habib, I'm never going to hold it against a family member or a close friend that they're coming in and it's hard. It's easy to say, oh, if my brother or my son committed murder, I'd turn him in.
And you know what, John, in fact, this kind of plays into, you remember saying, Nick, this kind of plays into that. You remember at some point telling the police that Susan told you, hey, there's nothing anyone can do for Captain now without Bobby. We have to help him out now.
Guys, I was trying to keep it in my mind till you stopped talking. I was going to tell you that I remember now what she said, and that was exactly it. There's nothing we can do for him now. That's exactly what she said.
So nothing we can do for him now?
No, I said, there's nothing we can do about Kathy now.
Yeah.
We left both of them, and Bob's the only one left, that sort of thing.
And so, in something to the effect that we gotta help him.
Yeah.
Hey, Nick, have you ever...
I just thought of it while we were talking, sorry.
That's okay. Have you ever shared... Do you know who Julie Smith is?
Yeah, Julie Bongold.
No, not Julie Bongold. Julie Smith. This was one of Susan's friends who's a writer.
Yeah, I know the name, and I'm trying to put together a reason there.
Well, she had... Yeah, she had said at the memorial. Do you remember what you told her?
I was at the memorial.
Yes. Do you remember what you told her at the memorial?
Oh, wow. I remember talking to her after. No, but I bet you can tell me, I'll remember it.
Do you remember telling her that there are no... My friend, Susan, said there are no coincidences, and then that Susan had told you that Bob had killed his wife. So do you remember sharing with her what you just told us, basically?
Yeah, I do remember that. I never kept that a secret. I told the first thing I talked to the police in Westchester, I told them. Yeah. And I always cautioned with the fact that, Susan exaggerated and lied a lot.
But if I were to ask you right now, when you're saying she exaggerated, based on what you know, I understand it's hard for you, but if I just ask you straight out, Nick, do you think that Bob killed Kathy?
After all these years, for the first time, now I do.
And do you think that Bob killed her?
I never thought it before. I mean, and if he did, it was passion. It wasn't for any nefarious, well, obviously not for he's rich, but it was passionate. I mean,
something happened in that.
He had a lot of problems.
Let me ask you this.
Yes, I did. That's your question. Yes, I did.
Do you think that Bob killed Susan?
I'm still not going to answer.
We don't get that.
I will later, though.
Okay. You say that, I'm sure part of you doesn't want to believe that Bob did it. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes.
Was it a fair statement or not a fair statement that you would maybe be, to say you could, somewhat protective of Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Nick, if I asked you right now, if I say, listen, I'll ask this question. Did Bob ever admit to you that he killed Kathy? Yeah, has Bob ever admitted to you that he killed Kathy?
No.
Not in so many words.
Wait a minute, that's a long pause, Nick.
Tell us what you mean by it. Not in so many words, but what has he said that kind of gives you that pause?
I think it happened recently.
You wait a minute.
You mean since he's interested?
I'm not talking about what you have heard. or read. Have you talked to Bob recently?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's happened that's kind of giving you this pause?
Yeah.
Right now, I don't want to talk about that.
Okay,
Let me ask you.
wait, Habib.
Well, I don't know if it was you or not, but let me ask you this straight up. And I appreciate all your honesty so far. And you being somewhat protective of him, is it because of a friendship, because of the monetary things he's done for you in the past, a combination?
I never did anything monetarily for me. I mean, I never bought a grave for him. I mean, never accepted an occasional present. Sometimes when we traveled, we'd stay our own way.
Yeah.
He never did a money thing for me. Both of us owed Susan money.
Yeah.
Hey, Nick, if I ask you right now,
Do you remember telling the police that people are protective of Bob because with, 50 to 100 million, he'd make his friends rich?
No.
No.
It's what if he had it?
No. You told the police in 2001, you were asked, hey, why are so many people so protective of Bob? And you said, hey, with 50 to 100 million, he could make his friends rich.
Yeah. I mean, you'd be surprised if people came out of the room with girls, especially that wanted to have a relationship with him.
So you your hesitancy to kind of give all the information you have, is it out of a friendship or maybe a possible desire for future monetary benefits or just a fear? What's your hesitation? Where's it coming from?
Well, part of it is friendship, but here's the deal. I've had a career in real estate advertising. That wouldn't have happened if it weren't for Bob.
Yeah, so although maybe he didn't pay you, you've benefited from your relationship with him.
I can check, but I did the work for it. I succeeded in nothing but when he opened the door, I couldn't have happened. When he was in the business, it seems target for us when I worked for Bob.
And let me ask you, because I'm not sure how that business works, but to the extent Bob decided, hey, I'm not really want to be friendly with Nick anymore, did he kind of stop your business relationship at this point, or is he still not friendly anymore?
He would have hurt my relationships with business, just mentioned, that we were still friends or anything. No. You see, he became a persona, a horrible persona. Yeah. So this is what died.
Hey, Nick,
That wasn't the case.
Nick, you know what I noticed, which you'll get sometimes, and I really appreciate it. There are some witnesses who, when you talk to, they will just lie to you. There are other people that when you ask them a question, they don't want to answer. They will just say, you know what, I don't want to answer that. So when I asked you, hey, listen, has Bob ever admitted that he killed Kathy? You had a long pause, and then you said, that's something I don't want to answer. I know you said you don't want to answer, but you agree you didn't say no, correct?
I agree to that.
Yeah, and
What about the question about
Habib,
have you ever talked to him?
That's even more tricky.
Would you even hesitate more to answer that question than the Kathy?
Yeah.
And your hesitation, would that be based on something that maybe you recently talked to him about since he's been in jail?
Yeah, you guys are pretty clever.
Yeah. Well, did you call him or did he call you? And both. And some of the stuff hasn't been recorded, so we'll eventually find out what we're going to find out. We'd rather hear from you honestly right now before we have to go down that road. We really
Tell me you were recording.
if we really know the truth, that's how we're out
Nick, he's talking about
You guys are recording this, right?
Nick, he's talking about the when Bob called you from jail.
Yeah.
So Nick, let me ask you this. So I said a second ago, I said, hey, and this is a pretty easy question. If I were to say to you, hey, did Bob ever admit to you that he killed Susan? And your answer is, I don't want to answer that. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so then Habib asked you, listen, has Bob talked to you about this situation, about Susan, when he's called you from jail, correct? And you said he has. No, he has not.
That's the reason.
Oh,
That's what's out here. We're clever, but we're not that clever. Give us a little bit of help here.
Well, first of all, whenever I've talked to Bob from jail, he's always said, this is being listened to, so watch what you say.
asked him, hey Bob, did you kill Kathy? Or was that another one of those ones you don't want to answer?
That's one of those I don't want to answer.
Okay, have you ever asked him, hey Bob, did you kill Susan?
Hold on, back up, John.
Wait, Habib, let me finish.
Before you ask that, you don't want to answer when you ask him that question. Can you at least tell us if you asked him that question? You don't need us to answer, but have you asked him that question?
I didn't have to.
Okay, so he basically just said it to you then.
Yeah.
And let me keep going, the same thing. Have you ever asked him if he killed Susan?
Oh, wait, I was just talking about Susan.
No, so basically he told you he killed Susan, but you didn't ask him.
I didn't say that either. I said I don't want to say what he said. It sounded like the guy used to being released.
You know, it's hard when you really either care for someone or you really want to protect them, but yet you know what the truth is. That's hard. I've never been in that position, so I can't imagine what it looks like. But
It's very interesting.
you know, you were friends with Susan too, and she was a person. She lived. She had a great life. Although it wasn't great at the end, it was taken from her, and she had kids. It was taken from them. You really have some information that really could bring justice and truth to a lot of people.
Nick, I want to go on.
Let me say one thing. The Bob that I knew before he broke off wasn't anything like the person he turned into after he was around of his birthright from the Durst Murder Trial. I mean, he wasn't a guy that ever held a gun in his life, and I grew up in Texas, so I'm used to guns. That conversation never came. This was not that person. He was an avoided confrontation. I mean, it's a whole different person. It's like I've heard your best friend and suddenly be a different person. 10 years past, he's now someone that's, hiding for a while, dressed up as a girl, and is keeping money and guns up in his car. I mean, this, of the two of us, I was the more outrageous.
Well, Nick, and this is where, and I know this is tough, but I want you to think about this for a second. Forgetting about Bob for a second, Susan was your close friend, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Forgetting about Bob for a minute, do you want the person who's responsible for her death, do you want that person held accountable? Forgetting about Bob for a second, just whoever that person is, do you want that person held accountable?
Well, you remember what Susan told me about Bob, which was, there's nothing we can do for her now. She's gone, but he's not.
And so the way I'm taking that, Nick, is you're kind of the same thing that Susan said about Kathy, you're now kind of saying to yourself about Susan, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, he's alive. He's not.
Yeah.
I want the person, you know what, that's part of the change that's happened with me. I do want the person accountable, and that's what's having this change.
You can do that by just telling us the truth.
I know. And I intended to probably not in this phone call.
Hey, Nick, so here's what I'd like you to do. And listen, you've given us, you have, I know when you get off this call, you can probably say to yourself, what have I done?
That's exactly
What have I said? And I can tell you that you've said a lot.
So my intention is to duck you as long as I possibly could. I was so far to the radar, it wouldn't happen.
Well, Nick, there's a reason why I wanted to talk to you now. There's a reason why I wanted to talk to you now, because I could tell when you said, listen, why don't you call me back at another time, we'll meet later. What was going to happen was you were very likely to decide, you know what, I don't want to talk because I don't want to get Bob in trouble. Am I right?
No. I had a month, 2 weeks ago, Charlie Bagley from the Times called me and asked me if Lewin called me, and called me. I said, no, you hadn't, to my knowledge. And I said, well, he's casting a wider net now. I know some people that he's calling, so he's probably going to call you.
Can I throw something out there, Nick?
Yeah.
Look,
I knew I can't.
you don't have to give us all the details now. If you choose to talk to us, then we can come out there and we can sit down and talk to you. But just tell us this, without going into all the details. I mean, we pretty much know it. You pretty much said it.
me just stop you. Let's go about it this way, Nick. So if I were to ask you right now, and it sounds like we're, hey, listen, if I said, hey, Nick, if Bob had told you that he killed Susan, would you tell me? It sounds like the answer is no, correct? So here's my question. Wait. Let me ask this. If Bob had confessed to you, if Bob had said, listen, I killed Susan, would you tell us right now?
Oh, I didn't want it right now.
Yeah. So, wait. So the answer for right now, at least during this phone call, is no, you would not tell us. Is that correct?
Well, I think he's telling us he has tell us, and we know the answer, he just doesn't want to use the words. Is that right?
I don't see you guys have had it right. I just want a little more time to think about it.
Can I just ask you this? Even though,
It's already out of the bag.
it is out of the bag, and since it's out of the bag, let me just ask you this. I don't know how long this conversation you had with Bob was, where he basically said killing Susan. What I want to know is, and you don't have to tell us the answer, did he explain to you why? We're trying to figure out why he did this to his best friend. Based on what he told you, can you give us the why he did it?
I can tell you the only thing that makes sense. He didn't say why. I can tell you the only thing that makes sense is it's obvious that it's a case reopening in Westchester.
But he didn't explicitly say that. You were indicating things that kind of made you confirm to you that's why.
She needed money desperately.
That's what
I loaned her a grand. I loaned her something. We had gone and stayed there for a week, Bob and I.
When was this?
And I looked at my time limit and keeping, that was while before she died.
What's that? How long?
I said, obviously it was before she died.
Right.
It was, can you guys hold on a second?
Sure.
That's the informal timeline I've been keeping. I don't know what is still wants to be. Yes. Did you? I don't know.
What's that?
Did you get on the phone about the chain locking?
Wait a minute, you're going in and out. Say that one more time, Nick.
Did you get some message I left for you guys about the chain locking ticket?
No, we thought that was a joke.
It was.
Oh, yeah, I didn't get that message.
Paused at 2 hours, 53 minutes, 22 seconds.
We'll take our recess, ladies and gentlemen, until 3:25. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case.